Good evening, everyone. I'm Edward Sullivan, and on behalf of the University of Toronto Men's Issues and Wellness Society, I'd like to thank everyone who's come out tonight. UTMIAS, how much do I have to shout? Let me know. Can you hear me in the back? There we go. Oh, yes, I'm just trying not to trip over it. There we go. Okay. UTMIAS, and it's a mouthful, I know, has been active at University of Toronto for the past 6 years, since 2012. Is the mic all right? Okay. Can everybody hear me now? No? This, let's lean over. Let's see if that works. There we go. The mic just doesn't like me. This happens every time, it seems like. Now, back to the speech. UTMIAS has been here since 2012. In the last 6 years, we have had the pleasure of bringing in a wide range of speakers to address critical issues facing boys, men, and families. Warren Farrell has been one of those speakers, one of the first, actually. But things have changed a bit since then. In some ways, we're doing the same things we've done for a number of years, but at the same time, the number of people who showed up that first time would have fit in the first half of the central section. I think everyone can look around and see that we're doing a little bit better than that this time, and that shows how attitudes have changed towards these topics in those intervening years. As the administration always reminds me, every single time, I do need to tell everyone that we aren't taking photos and videos during this presentation, and that the University of Toronto policy on the disruption of meetings is in effect tonight. On a lighter note, we have sign-up sheets for our email list outside. I hope a number of you will choose to do that as you exit. In addition to that, we have a number of signed copies of Dr. Farrell's book that he's been generous enough to provide. I believe those are $35, and they all first come, full serve, but no pushing, please. Finally, our sponsor, the Canadian Association for Equality, has a number of things for sale outside, including books, t-shirts, and so on. Justin? Please welcome Justin Trottier. He is the Executive Director for the Canadian Association for Equality, and it's thanks to their generous support that we are able to bring in speakers like Dr. Farrell.
Thank you, Edward. Is this better? Okay. I'm sorry, we should have handed this to Edward earlier. We will do that next time. I'm just going to share with you a few quick words, and then we are going to play a 4-minute video, and then I promise we'll get to the main event. So I'm Justin. I'm the director of the Canadian Association for Equality. I also have the extreme privilege of managing the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, which is Toronto's first men's health and social service facility. It's a very unique space. How many of you have visited the Centre for Men and Families? I'm impressed. And how many have benefited in some way by your interactions there? Excellent. Well, I hope many more of you will also come check us out. We're online at menandfamilies.org, and we're available in person at our office, which is located at Jarvis and Carleton, so not too far from here. I want to congratulate, first of all, the U of T Men's Issues Awareness Society for an amazing 6 years of bringing really dynamic speakers to the University of Toronto, and also working jointly with some of the other universities to bring speakers really all across Toronto. It's been a privilege for CAFE to be one of your sponsors, and certainly that includes our sponsorship tonight for this very special event. I wanted to just take a moment to remind us that UTMIA and CAFE, we host events that are challenging. Sometimes they generate strong opinions on various sides. We do this because we really think that these issues are crucially important. Sometimes even I would characterize them as life and death issues. Sometimes they do provoke, sometimes they do bring out, as I said, people with really strong opinions. But we do this in order to raise important dialogue, and then through the services that we provide to actually be a part of coming up with solutions to some of the problems, in fact, that we're going to hear about tonight from Dr. Farrell. So that's why we do what we do. I just want to acknowledge a couple of quick things. First of all, some thank yous. So thank you to some schools that have sent teachers and faculty out tonight. We've got several schools, both private boys' schools and also some public schools in the TDSB that are represented here, so we appreciate your interest in tonight's event. We also have some agencies that we partner with across the GTA that are also represented here, so welcome. I also want to thank some sponsors. So I'm here from CAFE, so thank you to CAFE for being a sponsor, and to the amazing volunteers, some of them from CAFE, some of them from UTMIA, that you would have met outside taking charge of the tables out there. But also some corporate sponsors, the Gene C. Coleman Family Law Center, thank you for your support, MDI, Matomo Nation, and the Men's and Women's Summit on Masculinity, which, by the way, is taking place Saturday night and Sunday. So you should look into that. And in fact, you've been given little cards that give you a passcode or a discount code if you wanted to go and purchase tickets to that, and you could still do that. CAFE is an organization I just want to mention has come a long way, and there's a lot of accomplishments I could go through. We've raised $250,000. We're building a fund to open the first shelter for fathers and families that have suffered domestic abuse. This would be the first and only one in Toronto and indeed across Ontario. So we're making great progress on that, and that should be happening in the next year. We've actually now gone to the government and asked them to match the generous contributions that have come in from many of you and many thousands of people across Canada, so they're looking into that proposal. But one way or the other, we will be opening the first shelter for abused men and children in the next year. I can also announce, and this is, I haven't made this public until now because we just got permission to do that. We've received our first federal grant from the Government of Canada to do a research project on male homelessness and domestic abuse. So looking at the degree to which domestic abuse is a contributing factor to male homelessness. Nobody's ever done research like this in Canada. Some research like this has been done internationally, but very little. So this is really a pioneering project. We're really grateful that this is the first major federal grant that we're getting. And again, I think it speaks to men's and boys' issues in Canada finally gaining a little bit of mainstream support. And I can tell you it's about time. Sorry? When do I expect that to be completed? So by early new year, January, February, that research should wrap up and we should have a report for you. And the research coordinator who's running that will be here to give a talk on campus February, March-ish, so you'll find out more about that. So I want to thank you for your attention, and we are going to play a short 4-minute video, and then I'm gone. You'll be grateful about that, and we'll introduce Warren. And let me just quickly set up the video. So we're doing a major campaign this year. We want to expand the Centers for Men and Family, these life-changing social service agencies, which have really affected people very positively all across Ontario. We want to move them outside Ontario. We want these to go all over Canada. We're running a Patreon campaign. This is a crowdfunding platform, if you're familiar with it. And there's a couple of incentives right now. So if you donate now, if you set up a Patreon profile, which means that you become a sustaining or a monthly donor to our cause, then we have a sponsor who will kick in 6 times the value of that donation. So you donate, let's say, $20 a month, and this individual immediately donates $120 if you do that before the end of the year. So please take advantage of that. We really want to bring these first-of-their-kind men's centers all over Canada. We have a formula that works. It's gaining government support. It's gaining support from lots of private and public actors, and it's also transforming the lives of thousands of families. So we know what we're doing. We want to do it all across Canada. Please be partners with us and join us as champions of boys, men, and fathers. And I'm going to play this 4-minute video, and then I am out of your way. How do I do this? Oh, that rolls out. Okay. And then...
I would say somebody that was in my position now, that I thought that I was at a point of no return. I was at a point of almost suicidal thoughts. And I would say to anybody that feels hopeless, that it feels that they can't get any help, there is a place for help.
Having all the services in one place has helped tremendously in reducing the stress of an already stressful situation.
I was really happy when I did contact the Canadian Centre for Men and Families. That there was a program that was designed specifically for men that were in my situation. And even just finding out that there was an agency dedicated to helping men.
My financial situation wasn't that good, and I found out that it was free. I didn't expect too much in the beginning, but since I've been coming, I've noticed that my relationship with my family has gotten a lot better. I've been a lot calmer in dealing with people, and it also has helped me to open bonds between my parents, especially my father.
At the center, we're changing public perceptions about men.
I wasn't concerned that I wouldn't be taken seriously. However, after I left the relationship, I did go to the police and I wasn't taken seriously. The nature of the violence was there was a lot of emotional abuse, verbal abuse that eventually escalated into physical abuse, including being approached, attacked with a knife at one point in time.
I was in a lot of distress due to a recent divorce, and I was looking for a place that offered support for fathers going through these issues.
Over the years, I had grown a lot of resentment against my father, and that resentment turned not only against my father, but against everyone else in my family and against the world. And in turn, it gave me a bad attitude against in my life perspective in general, and to the point that it was affecting my work, my health, and everybody around me.
There were some challenges for me thinking about talking about my story in front of other people, and particularly strangers. One of the interesting things for me was how quickly, as I said, we came together and just felt very comfortable with each other, and it became very easy to tell my story to them. And as a matter of fact, I get deeper and deeper, and one of the things I get out of this program is I actually start realizing more things about my story when I listen to other men's stories. So in coming into this group has been very powerful for me, and I'd really recommend it to anybody who's experienced any kind of domestic violence or abuse that they look into this program.
The legal clinic has been a tremendous help. They are able to provide the insight that I need when I'm confused about a certain issue, and it also helps that it's a group setting in which I can observe other people's angles of dealing with a situation, and the lawyers are very, very knowledgeable, very friendly.
I was really happy to find the Canadian Centre for Men and Families. They have mental health programs, they look after fathers or have programs for fathers who are separated from their children, and there's financial and legal assistance as well.
I've had a lot of growth since coming here. There's a lot of things I would have handled differently had I known what I know now. Hearing about how other fathers in the groups have responded to their situations, it has provided me a lot of insight and very valuable information.
If I had not gotten help, I don't know where I would be today, honestly, and I'm forever in debt to you all at the Men's Center.
It does look a little bit better when I don't have to bend over all the way. So, you all know who you've come here to hear from, but let me tell you just a little bit about him. Dr. Warren Farrell is an educator, an author, and a social activist who is best known for taking the most challenging aspects of gender diversity and addressing them in a compassionate and direct way. Over a career spanning nearly half a century, Dr. Farrell has been a tireless advocate for the rights and needs of both men and women. Though he's never been shy about expressing his views, he's also unique because he's been a tireless advocate for honest, compassionate, and respectful dialogue, even with some of his harshest critics. In a field like this, sometimes that can be hard to come by. Dr. Farrell? Thank you very much. It's nice to see you back.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I want to thank three people in particular for making this possible, aside from the many people that back them up. One is Ed Sullivan, who is obviously the president of the Men's Issues Awareness Society at the University of Toronto. This is my first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, so I'm really happy to be here. But this is my second appearance here. I was here at the University of Toronto, as some of you may remember, exactly 6 years ago to the night, and almost exactly 6 years ago to the 7:20 that I started to come on to make the presentation. It was a bit more controversial at the time, and fortunately, CAFE has done a great deal of work with Justin Trottier and Robert Samory and spread the word that there are women's issues, absolutely, and there's also men's issues, and there's also boys' issues, and we're all in the same family boat, and when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. And that's basically the underlying belief that I work from, and so when I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women, I spoke all around the world on women's issues and still believe in a great many dimensions of feminism, expanding women's opportunities. But I also began to see, as I spoke all around the world, that boys, the teachers were coming up to me saying, my boys in my class are actually doing worse than girls in my class. I know you're talking about women's issues, but I really want you to sort of pay attention to that. And when I heard that for the 300th or 400th time, it began to sink in. And so that's what led to my writing the book, The Boy Crisis. But you'll hear, so since I'm here to talk about the boy crisis, let me go deeply into it. This is going to be it's going to be an in-depth type of experience. This is a sophisticated audience. People don't come to audiences like this and evening programs like this unless they want something that is new and that is challenging. And so this will be, I think, both. My research in this area has been for the past 11 years, and I'm going to start out looking at something that is interesting, I think. Let's look at how the boy crisis is making the headlines without even making the news. There have been 352 shootings in Toronto so far in 2018. But mass shootings in Canada are rare, only one in Toronto, compared to the US. In the US, the day of the Thousand Oaks mass shooting was the 311th day of 2018, and it was the 307th mass shooting in 2018, almost one mass shooting per day. The visibility of the mass shootings in the United States allow us to see what is invisible in Canada. That is, the visibility of the mass shootings allow the family backgrounds of the mass shooters to often make the news, which the lone mass shooters do not usually make the news. Their family backgrounds don't. And so it's allowed me to peek into what's the dynamic in the family that can make a boy so desperate and hurt so much that he would engage in a mass shooting. Making headlines are the tragic Thousand Oak mass shooting, which happened a few weeks ago by Ian David Long, and the synagogue mass shooting in Pittsburgh by Robert Bowers. The headlines that you see say the reason for these mass shootings are it's toxic masculinity, it's toxic divisiveness of politics, especially in the United States. It's poor family values, it's violence in the media, it's violence in video games, it's access to guns, it's mental illness. And each of those are players. But our daughters are exposed to the same toxic politics. They live in the same homes with the same family values, the same access to the same guns, same video games, same media, and similar mental illnesses. And our daughters are not killing. Our sons are. So what is it with our boys? The headlines focused on the mass shootings ignore the boy crisis, but the boy crisis is a pivotal cause of the headlines. Thus, the boy crisis is making the headlines, but the boy crisis itself is rarely making the news. But let's dig deeper for a moment. Aside from being male, almost all of these lone mass shooters has in common one other quality. Anyone like to guess what that other quality is? Fatherless home. Fatherless home, yes. Somebody's read the Boy Crisis book. Yes, it's minimal or no father involvement. So let's take a look at that for back that up. The 28-year-old Thousand Oaks mass shooter, Ian David Long, had a dad who died of cancer when he was very young. And like many dad-deprived boys, Ian faced a multitude of problems in school and ultimately joined the Marines, also very common to dad-deprived boys. Ian returned to live with his mom for the last 12 to 15 years before he did the mass shooting. The relationship with his mom was so fraught that neighbors often called the police out of fear. In the synagogue mass shooting by Robert Bowers was without his dad since age 6, when his dad apparently committed suicide after being charged with rape. Like many dad-deprived boys, Robert dropped out of high school and was a loner, involved in no school activities, and able to be remembered by not a single classmate. Now, he dropped out of high school, but there were still 3 years for the classmates to get to know him, quote, know him. In the Jacksonville shooting by David Katz, David's parents divorced when David was 11. He lived with his mom during his teenage years in an extremely fraught relationship in which both threatened each other with knives. All of these things that I'm mentioning, I'll be getting to some of the underlying patterns and causes that create these outcomes. Minimal or no father involvement was also common to the infamous lone mass shootings by Elliot Rogers of UC Santa Barbara and Nicholas Cruz of Parkland, as well as the mass Charleston church shooting by Dylan Roof. But the one that fascinates me most, though, is the shooting by Stephen Paddock. Do you remember Stephen Paddock? He did the Las Vegas shooting, which killed 58 people and injured almost 500. Very few people remember that Stephen's dad had been in prison, but close to the time that his dad was about to be released, his dad chose to prove his genius, which he had proven many times before, by escaping the highest security prison he'd ever been put in. His dad succeeded, infuriating Stephen that his dad had to stay in hiding rather than wait just a little longer to be able to return to Stephen. Stephen doubtless tried to prove to his dad that he too was a diabolical genius, worthy of his dad's attention, as he orchestrated the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history, the 58 people killed and almost 500 injured. One of the takeaways from that is that boys who hurt us. Even as these mass shootings continue to make the headlines, the boy crisis, nevertheless, continually fails to make the news. If we wish to stop mass shootings, we really know the two things that would stop them. They are basically dads in, guns out. Unfortunately, in the United States at least, the conservatives agree with dads in, and the liberals agree with guns out, but it's very difficult to get them both to agree to both. For example, dads in. Boys living in intact families with significant father involvement are rarely doing these lone mass shootings. Almost never. Guns out. Nor are mass shootings happening in Canada, UK, Australia, Japan, and almost any country where gun ownership is but a fraction of that in the United States. It's hard to kill or injure 550 people with a knife. But if we wish to reduce shootings of 1 to 3 people from the 352 shootings in Toronto so far in 2018, then we need to focus on re-involving dads in the family. Aside from the mass shooting, is there other evidence of the boy crisis? What's causing it? And what can we do about it? The first hint, let me see if you can guess what hint comes out of this. The International PISA, the program tests sponsored by the UN, report boys falling behind girls in almost every academic area in more than 60 of the largest developed nations. Anyone want to guess what the hint is? The word developed. I began to see that as developed nations solved one problem, the problem of survival, they typically allowed new freedoms that created new problems. Developed nations typically allow more permission both for divorce and for children to be born to unmarried mothers. In the United States today, 53% of women under 30 who have children without being married. Among women not living with their dad, some children don't know their dad at all. Few children have significant involvement with their dad. But even among the women who are living with dad, when they have the child, only 40% of the children do not have consistent contact with their dad after 3 years. So marriage, it turns out, does have an impact on the retaining the involvement of the father. Now, I just want to make sure that I'm clear that not all children of divorce or unmarried mothers have problems. And if you ask me about it after the session is over, I'll talk to you about what are the 4 must-dos that have to happen after divorce if children are going to be having a relatively good chance of doing well. Children whose fathers remain significantly involved or dad-enriched children are often doing only slightly less well than children in an intact family if they have all those 4 must-dos. However, children with minimal or no father involvement, what I call dad-deprived children, experience problems in more than 70 areas that I was able to document by going to the original research. Yes, 70, some of which I'll discuss today. You'll be happy to know I'm not going to be discussing all of them today. And the rest are documented, though, very carefully in the boy crisis. I want to spend a minute on our daughters. Daughters of divorced and unmarried mothers also have most of the 70 problems. Daughters also suffer, but they suffer in some different areas, and they don't suffer as much in the areas as the boys do. So the 2 areas that girls suffer more in is they suffer more in relationships, or as much as rather, is relationship with boys and with unmarried teenage pregnancy. But overall, our dad-deprived daughters suffer less than our dad-deprived sons. And I think some of the reasons for this is that daughters have a same-sex parent, so more of a role model. They have more permission to express feelings when things are going wrong, and they have much more permission to ask for help. 3 of boys' problems is that they are deprived. The society, the norm to be a male, deprives boys of all this. Let me be really scientific about this for a moment. One of the things that shocked me most was seeing the scientific evidence showing that the connection between dad deprivation and life deprivation. That is telomeres. Do you know what telomeres are? Raise your hand if you do. I'm going to explain then. Every cell in our body has telomeres. Our cells are constantly reproducing. In our cells, these telomeres are, the longer the telomeres are, the more of the genes they can contain that help prevent disease, like cancer, heart attacks. Telomeres are such an indicator of how long you'll live that the National Association of Science says that telomeres at the age of 9 are the single biggest predictor of a person's life expectancy. You have 14% shorter telomeres, your life expectancy will be approximately 14% shorter. So there was some studies done of 9-year-old boys. They tested for a large number of variables. The variable that they didn't expect to have any particular impact, but they were smart enough to ask, was amount of father involvement. They found that boys and girls, on average, averaging the sisters and brothers together, boys and girls who were, by the age of 9, who did not have significant father involvement, the telomeres on average were 14% shorter. However, what they also found was there's a gap between boys' shorter telomeres versus girls' shorter telomeres. The boys' shorter telomeres were yet again 40% shorter than the girls. What I saw was that the boy crisis resides where fathers do not reside. But the telomere example is not only scientifically true, it is almost a perfect metaphor for the greater vulnerability of boys to all types of emotional disconnection. When boys and girls break up in relationships and you use gender-neutral criteria to determine the after effect, boys suffer more from breakups in romantic relationships than girls do. Much more likely to commit suicide, and when you measure depression in not just a female style of measurements of how women exhibit depression, much more depression as well. When boys and girls' families move to different locations, different neighborhoods, girls do better when they move to better neighborhoods with better schools. Boys do worse even when they move to better neighborhoods with better schools. After divorce, boys do significantly worse than girls do in most of the 70 areas, some of which I'll be talking about. I ultimately defined 9 causes of the boy crisis. We'll talk about a few of them, such as education, the feminization of education, what's happening in education, and some of the solutions that can be looked at there. There's others that do not connect that much to, or if at all, to dad deprivation, like the 50% reduction in sperm count of boys in the last 20 to 30 years. But the great majority of other causes were magnified by dad deprivation. So, for example, boys' purpose void. To understand the significance of the purpose void, I think there's probably helpful to understand 3 things. First is, what is boys' traditional sense of purpose? Second, what is the current purpose void? And third, how the purpose void is magnified by the dad void. So, first, the traditional sense of purpose. In the past, the boy was not respected as a man unless he had adopted 2 rigid senses of purpose: be potentially disposable as a warrior or potentially disposable as a sole breadwinner, being willing to risk being in the most hazardous professions like coal miner, firefighter. Hence, in the US and Canada, there's the hazardous professions are 93% of the deaths are those of men. The sense of purpose is still with us today. Good Morning America just featured after the Thousand Oaks shooting. It said, quote, they tweeted, "A woman who was celebrating her 21st birthday at Thousand Oaks Bar, where the mass shootings broke out, said, 'There were multiple men that got on their knees and pretty much blocked all of us, ready to take a bullet for any single one of us.'" That's the old purpose void, being willing to die so a woman, children, families, country will survive in operation. But one of the reasons we don't care about the boy crisis is because our survival was dependent upon training our sons to be willing to be disposable. And it's hard to psychologically attach to somebody you're going to lose. And the characteristics it takes to train boys to be disposable, now called toxic masculinity, refraining from expressing feelings, opening one's heart, asking for help, make it hard to feel a lot of empathy and attachment to the boys. So we've learned not to care about the people who have been risking their lives to save us, except at the moment they do risk their lives or die. The good news is that fewer boys are needed as warriors or sole breadwinners today. The bad news is that millions of boys are experiencing a purpose void, often leaving these boys unmotivated. So boys' purpose void is also a contributor to the boy crisis. You see this especially in countries like Japan, where we're protecting Japan and the boys don't have to be trained to be warriors. And so there's an enormous purpose void among boys in Japan. For dad-deprived boys, though, the purpose void is magnified by the dad void. Without a dad's guidance, a boy's testosterone is much more vulnerable to be channeled destructively, for an example, by an authoritarian gang leader or a drug dealer. With a dad's consistent guidance, notice I didn't just say a dad's guidance, but a dad's consistent guidance, a boy's testosterone is far more likely to be channeled into a constructive purpose. Now, here's the irony. For boys with involved dads or dad-enriched boys, the purpose void of today is actually good news. The purpose void is more devoid of social bribes to be disposable. Social bribes such as being called a hero if you're disposable, if you make yourself into a Marine, a soldier, if you're working 70 hours a week to become a CEO. Therefore, a dad is freer to encourage his son today to discover himself rather than to dispose of himself, to not become a human doing like his grandpa, but to discover himself as a human being for the first time in history. But most dads know it's not good enough to have a dream. A dream without discipline and postponed gratification is a dream that will ultimately fail until a person is afraid to dream. Most dads know that the more fulfilling, and this is some of the reasons, the things that motivate dads to create discipline in their sons and their daughters rather than just have dreams without the discipline accompanying it. Most dads know that the more fulfilling a career is, what? The less it pays or the more it pays, the fulfilling careers? The more fulfilling the career, the less it pays. Hence you hear starving artist, or actors in Hollywood all have pretty much the same name, waiter. Most dads sense what I'm going to say now, but don't have these words for it. They sense that the power of pay is a paradox. That is, high pay is about the power that you forfeit to get the power of pay. What is the power that a dad forfeits? If he loves to teach, and I've known many, I was brought up as an educator, and I knew many, many men who loved to teach, was their passion, but when they had children, especially if they had multiple children, and especially if their wives wanted to stay home full time, they realized that they could no longer teach, that they had to become an administrator, and the people who were the most passionate as teachers rarely loved being an administrator. And if the children were larger numbers, they realized they had to leave education altogether and sell insurance or do something else that made more money per hour spent. If they sold insurance locally, they oftentimes felt that they had to experience the father's catch-22. The father's catch-22 is that learning to love his children by being away from the love of his children. So if he was a local insurance salesperson and he was offered a job as a national representative, he learned to take the job as a national representative because that would earn more money, that would allow his children to live in better homes, go to better schools and better neighborhoods, and also have options that he never had. What dads sense is that the road to high pay is a toll road. Longer hours, selling products maybe he believes in less, keeping his mouth shut, protesting company policies or the boss. He doesn't feel intuitively when he hears men accused of, we have male privilege, we have male power. He thought of it, most dads think of it, once they become dads, as his obligation, as his responsibility. The degree to which a dad does not feel worthy of love or respect by his own parents or the woman he married, if he does not earn sufficient money, is the degree to which the money he earns is a reflection of the discrimination against him in his role. We have taught dads to call it power to earn money his family spends while he dies sooner. Some good news for boys. While millions of boys are dad deprived, millions of other boys, if you walk into a park on the weekend, you'll see dads more involved with their kids, playing with their kids, engaged, teaching them, mentoring them, more engaged than I ever saw my father or any of the fathers from my generation, and certainly more engaged than my father's father ever was. That's happening more now. Raise your hand if you've seen that in parks. The gap between dad-deprived boys versus dad-enriched boys predicts an enormous gap between our future leaders and boys in crisis. To understand this deeply enough to translate this into parenting, into our schools, and into Canadian law, it requires answering at least two core questions. First, exactly what are the consequences of dad deprivation that lays the foundation for boys who are hurt to hurt us? And secondly, exactly what is dad-style parenting? How does it differ from mom-style parenting? And why does dad-style parenting help children? And why is the most important type of parenting where children do the best what I've come to call checks and balance parenting, where mothers and fathers learn how to communicate with each other with an equal amount of power to be able to negotiate the best solutions for kids, with the dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting both considered as options towards solutions. I've been talking for a while, though, and I'm from California, so would you be good, indulge me for a moment. I'll just ask everybody to stand up and turn to the right, to this side of the auditorium, and move within arm's distance of the person in front of you, if you would. Okay. Within arm's distance of the person in front of you, just sort of move down. So move right up, right up. Don't be afraid of him. He's not that bad. You can move on back. Okay. And I see some people who are afraid to be within arm's distance of the person in front of them, so just please move closer. And I'll ask you to take, with permission of the person in front of you, just rub their shoulders a bit so that you can give them. All right. Somebody said higher or lower, please, but tell the person whether you want it harder or softer. I'll ask you to turn around and massage the shoulders of the person who just massaged you. There we go. Okay, give yourselves a big hand. What's the connection of what I just asked you to do to recess to our schools?
Not allowed to touch each other.
Well, there's a good point. There's much hands to yourself, not allowed to touch each other. And also recess. In our schools, recess has been cut back significantly in almost all schools in North America and many schools in Europe as well. But now the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has just come out with the finding saying that if you're studying for a test, the minutes spent in recess actually connect the brain synapses in such a way that they're more effective in preparing for the test than studying is. But we've become so gun-shy, if you will, of recess, so gun-shy of teasing on the playground, so gun-shy of so many of these other activities, fear of lawsuits in the United States in particular, where we're sort of lawsuit oriented. These are all things that are leading not only, in the case of recess, not only to our sons doing worse, our sons doing significantly worse when they don't have recess, our daughters doing, again, slightly worse when they don't have recess, even in the one area that is the excuse for recess not being used, which is that the kids have to focus so much on the curriculum. They have so many demands on them. They shouldn't do recess. We don't have time for that. Is the reason, aside from the litigation things and aside from too many kids getting hurt. We have the problem of, in fact, recess even being more helpful, again, than studying itself. So this is an example of recess, what you just did. The findings, I said the first thing I was going to do is to share the consequences of dad deprivation. I'm just going to share a little bit personally now for a minute that everything I'm going to say is really challenging for me to share, because being on the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City, it was really clear to me when now is getting a great deal of pressure to have now members wanted to have the option of being the primary parent after divorce, and they wanted to have the freedom to be able to raise children by themselves. And I questioned that and said, I don't know that that's the best outcome. And they said, well, this is what we want, freedom for women. And I said, well, I'm 100% supporter of freedom for women, but when women make the free decision to have children, then at that moment they make the free decision to put their children's needs first. And now the now board members grimaced, and I said, and they challenged me, and I said, well, what's the research that you have? Is there really, can the children really do much better with fathers? I think fathers, they said, are not that competent at parenting, and a mother should decide whether the children should have both parents. If the children were going to benefit from both parents, the mother would be fine with that. And so I said, well, I'm not sure 100% positive, because this was the early 70s. And in the early 70s, there wasn't enough longitudinal research, because divorces has just been happening in huge numbers, and you can't really make decisions about what's best for children at the age of 4 or 5. You have to look at what's happening at age 15, 20, 25, and so on. Now we have that longitudinal research. And as I began to get that research and gather that research together, every part of me that I don't feel proud of wanted to find that children did better primarily with mom, because I wanted my job. I was making very, very good money speaking around the world on women's issues. I was up for some major grants and awards, and all of those disappeared, from 50 speaking engagements to 0, as I came up with increasingly the findings I'm going to be sharing with you now, that are most revised and updated in this current book, but I began to speak up about a number of them in the initial stages that got me into trouble. And so I was able to see that I was no longer speaking, certainly at NOW conventions or on college campuses, which have sort of become the extension of NOW conventions. So here goes. The consequences of being either dad enriched or dad deprived. Boys who are dad enriched do better in math and science, even when they come from the most poorly ranked schools, more poorly ranked schools, than do dad deprived boys who come from good neighborhoods, wealthy neighborhoods, good schools. Among boys raised predominantly by dads, only 15% have ADHD versus 30% raised by moms. I'll go into the reasons for that in a little while. Counterintuitively, the more a boy has his father's involvement, the more empathy he is likely to have. This is not saying that dads are more empathetic. They're less empathetic. But we'll see why the less empathetic dads are involved with the creation of the more empathetic children. Dad deprivation, on the other hand, is the greatest predictor of a boy committing suicide. When boys and girls in both the US and Canada, the statistics are almost identical, are at the age of 9, boys and girls commit suicide very minimally and about equally. Between the ages of 10 and 14, boys commit suicide twice as often as girls do. Between the ages of 15 and 19, boys commit suicide 4 times as often. Between the ages of 20 and 24 rather, boys commit suicide almost 6 times as often, as do girls. How many knew about that statistic before? How many did not know about that before? Can we imagine that if that statistic was reversed, that we wouldn't know about it? We would be having a great deal of focus on how are these girls' development so fragile and treacherous that they're committing suicide 6 times as often as boys by their early 20s. And I would care about that. And anyone that didn't care about that, I'd be fighting with. We've seen that behind the mass shootings is dad deprivation, and mass shootings are not only homicides. Mass shootings are also what? Suicides. Not always literally, but for all practical purposes, a boy knows that when he does a mass shooting, it's the end of his functional life. Dad deprivation is also the greatest predictor of a boy being addicted to drugs. We all hear of the drug epidemic. He's much more likely to drink excessively. He's more likely to be a bully, and he's more likely to be bullied. As it turns out, bullies and the bullied have very similar personalities. In addition to doing worse on almost every subject and being both expelled and suspended far more frequently, it is also the biggest predictor of a boy dropping out of school, becoming alienated, rudderless, and unemployed. A boy who drops out of school has 5 times greater chance of being unemployed in his 20s, this is high school I'm talking about, and is much more likely to be a criminal. The result? We have thousands of women's centers in the United States and in Canada. But we have a special name for our men's centers. They're called what? Prisons, exactly. But prisons are not just 92% males in Canada. More precisely, prisons are centers for dad-deprived boys and men at the 90+% level. And a study of ISIS recruits was done by 3 female sociologists. When they came out, when they independently did their group of ISIS recruits, these were ones in prison, the 3 female sociologists happened to mention that a lot of the ISIS recruits mentioned really being at grief with not having their dads involved with them. And so, but they hadn't really asked that question. They had not asked that question in their initial questioning of them. So they went back, to their credit, and asked that question systematically, and it ended up measuring as being more potent and more important than any other single reason for joining ISIS. They wanted to have a sense of purpose, do something bigger themselves. They didn't have their testosterone well channeled. And so if you think about the disaster, the sadness for the boy, and by the way, the females who didn't have father involvement, who were a much smaller percentage of ISIS recruits, they also had dad deprivation as an issue. These boys hurt. Ironically, the availability, especially in the United States, of AR-15 style assault weapons is making us care about boys because it makes it easier for boys who hurt to hurt us. But of course, we're not really caring about boys. We're caring mostly about ourselves being hurt. Second, I promised that I would look at exactly what is dad-style parenting and why does it help children, especially when combined with mom-style parenting, or what I call checks and balance parenting. There's about 10 differences between dad and mom-style parenting, but I have time tonight just to share one predominantly. And so I'll look at roughhousing. Roughhousing is much more frequently done by dads than by moms. And when dads do roughhousing, usually moms are saying some version of like, I feel like I have just one more child to monitor here. And the moms are often afraid to interfere because they don't want to be controlling and they want to they see the kids are having fun and they feel, but they're saying in their mind's eye, okay, I don't want to control this, but I know, I just sense that sooner or later something's going to happen. Somebody's going to end up crying. Somebody's going to end up getting hurt. And she's beginning to feel guilty that she's not intervening, but she feels guilty if she does intervene. And so, but she sort of knows that sooner or later something's going to happen. The percentage chance that she's likely to be right is what? About 100%, somewhere between 99 and 100%. But then something even more appalling happens. The roughhousing ends up with somebody crying or somebody being hurt. And Dad says, you can't, Jimmy, you have to watch out. Let's say that the roughhousing was like wrestling, and Dad threw all 3 kids on the couch, of course. And the game was to jump off onto Dad's back and to pin Dad down before Dad could pin the 3 of them down together. So there's Johnny, Jimmy, and Jane. And Johnny and Jimmy start out all right, but they're really excited, and each one wants to be the kingpin, the chief wrestler. And so Johnny and James start knocking each other around, and Jane is being hurt by the older brother, and the dad stops, and he says, hey, you can't do this, and if you do it anymore, no more roughhousing. And Mom goes, okay, wait a minute, Dad stopped, good. But Dad said if you can, he's going back to doing the very roughhousing that I knew with a 100% certainty was going to end up this. He really is a child I have to monitor. And so at that point, so Dad continues the roughhousing, and then eventually the children once again do what? Somebody gets hurt, somebody starts crying. And Mom is now feeling guilty that she didn't intervene sooner and didn't stop the process, but still didn't want to be controlling. And so she's caught in both between the rock and a hard place. And Dad never explains to Mom, because dads don't read parenting magazines. They don't read the boy crisis and things like that. They don't find out what is there about roughhousing. And parenting magazines don't even contain this information. They don't tell you why roughhousing leads to more empathy, more assertiveness, less aggressiveness, and a series of, and done right, like I'm going to be describing, leads to postponed gratification. So let's break this down for a moment. So what Dad doesn't say to Mom, and moms can't hear what dads don't say, is that when I'm doing the roughhousing, I create a bond with the children. This bond allows me to enforce boundaries without the children rebelling against it, because they want to return to this greater bond and this greater excitement of the roughhousing. So I enjoy the roughhousing independently. The kids love it and I love it, but the bond that it creates allows me to do boundary enforcement. And so when the kids do what inevitably they're going to do, which is becoming too aggressive, I say to them, you can't do that to your sister, your brother, your younger brother. And then I don't stop there, because if I only stop there, that's just a lecture. But when I give them the chance to have what psychologists call emotional intelligence under fire, to see whether once they're excited and they really agree that they should treat their brother and sister with respect, but all that goes out the window when they really want to be the winner in the roughhousing. So then they get a chance to try the roughhousing out again to see if they can be assertive but not aggressive, to see if they can use eye contact and other things to win in the wrestling match but not to be aggressive toward each other. And so then they usually fail at that. But then when Dad says, there's no more wrestling now till tomorrow night, the next night the kids get the same warning, but this time they know they're going to lose their roughhousing, so something is competing against the desire to win and competing against the willingness to shove their sister or brother aside so they can be the kingpin in the wrestling match. So the dad is using going back to the roughhousing, which seems crazy to the mom. The dad is using that for the purpose of seeing whether the kids can act out in real life experience the difference between being assertive versus being aggressive. Dad feels that if he only tells the children that, everybody will agree. Everybody agrees they should be nice to their brother and sister most of the time. But that they won't know how to do that. He feels that the moms lecturing them doesn't give them the experience of operating, of carrying that out in real life. And moms look on, and there's a certain amount of sadness and many times feeling of being disrespected that many moms feel when they notice that when she says something like, be careful, watch out for your sister's needs, brother's needs, that the kids just go right back to agreeing, and she has to repeat it, and she has to repeat it again. And now she's watching Dad, and Dad only has to say it one time, and she feels, what is there about Dad having to say it only one time? What is it, the male voice? Is it male chauvinism? Is it male sexism? Is it, something like that? But I have to repeat it over and over again. And because moms, as a rule, are more involved with the children than dads are, it's really sad that with all the investment, that the mom often feels that she has to repeat something, because when you have to repeat something, you often feel not respected. And so, but again, dads do not share this process with moms, and now the studies just recently are telling us for the first time that the more roughhousing that children do with their dads or their moms, particularly if it's combined with boundary enforcement, the better the children learn the difference between being assertive versus aggressive. And what the father is doing is requiring the children. He's not just asking the children to be thoughtful of their brother or sister. He's requiring the children to be thoughtful of their brother and sister. And if they aren't thoughtful of their brother or sister, he's preventing them from doing what they really want to do, which is the roughhousing. And he uses that same type of strategy with things like, okay, bedtime is at 9 o'clock. If you get ready by 8:30, we'll go back to roughhousing and back to doing whatever you want, including reading their favorite story for bed. And mom says, I love that you are wanting them to do all that, and you're setting a good boundary, but you're not going to really try to roughhouse with them between 8:30 and 9, just rile them up before they go to bed. And Dad says, I'll let them do anything that they want to, including roughhousing before they go to bed. And if they don't sleep well, then we'll reconsider that. But let them have the freedom to make their own mistakes and then see where that comes from that. Now, something else happened in here if we deconstruct this scenario. One is that it wouldn't have worked if there wasn't something called what? Boundary what? Consequences, boundary enforcement. And the enforcement wouldn't work without the consequences. And so and moms and dads do things very similarly on one level. They both set similar types of boundaries. The key word here is set. Both moms and dads tend to say, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. Kids do the same thing with that setting of boundaries. They test them. And the kids want to have as few peas as possible before they have their ice cream. But moms, so the kids say, okay, I had some more peas. Can I have the ice cream now? And moms will feel, well, all right, tell you what, honey, they'll take a fork and maybe put this number of more peas that you have to eat before you get your ice cream. And then the kid eats about a half of those peas that the mother puts aside. And the mother thinks, all right, I know that the boy just mentioned, or the daughter just mentioned that they had a tough day. I've had a tough day. We have only a few precious moments at dinner time together. Am I going to take these few precious moments and am I going to make a big hassle out of a few peas? I don't think so. But she sees Dad is making a big hassle out of a few peas. Dad goes, excuse me, we have a deal here. The deal is you can have your ice cream if you finish your peas. You don't have your ice cream if you don't finish your peas. Well, can I have just a few more peas, Dad, then have the ice cream? The deal is finish. You're so mean. Mom doesn't do that. Well, you can keep complaining and you won't have your ice cream tomorrow, any ice cream tomorrow night either. Then the kid realizes, wow, there's no way of getting around it with Dad. So what I got to do is finish my what? I have to finish my P's. So the child focuses on finishing the P's rather than focusing on manipulating a better deal. And so so moms report themselves to be far more feeling like they're coerced by their children. Every woman I dated I'm married, involved with my wife now for the last 25 years, but before that I had a period of dating between first marriage and being involved with my wife. Every single woman I dated, I realized that almost all the women who were mature were ones that had children. And so I started dating these women with children, and the most common word from all these women, aside from occasionally love, was the feeling of being what? What's that? Yeah, a feeling they weren't eating their peas, therefore they felt, what's the O word? Overwhelmed. The overwhelmed word came up again and again and again. The mothers were such a juggling act, so often overwhelmed. And so what the dad is doing is teaching the child to have postponed gratification. That is, not to be able to get what it wants, the ice cream, until it finishes what it needs to do. Hence, we find that among children raised predominantly by dads, the ADHD level is very minimal, 15% versus 30%, because the children are required to focus on what they need to do. But more importantly, is without postponed gratification comes the slippery slope into the boy crisis. Here's what I mean. The boy is far more likely to go to school and not be able to finish homework because without postponed gratification, he gets distracted by a text or an invitation to do a new video game or some other offer, and he doesn't end up finishing the homework. Or he happens to be tall and he's good at basketball or he's good at ice hockey, but his natural talent is not capitalized by being on a star on the team like he has the talent to do because he doesn't go to the drills, he doesn't repeat the practice, he doesn't have the discipline to keep doing over and over again the routine things that any gymnast or a successful person needs to have. And so he has a dream, and kids around him are seeing he's inherently good at something. But every time he has a dream, he finds it ends up being what? A disappointment. And who is he disappointed in? Himself. And he feels less acknowledged by his teachers, less acknowledged by his classmates. His parents make comments that indicate that they're prouder of his sister getting great grades than him. Girls suffer from the same problem of lack of postponed gratification, but again, not to the same degree as boys. And so the boys in particular then tend to start withdrawing. And as they withdraw and feel worse about themselves, they oftentimes get addicted to video games. Boys and girls both play video games. Video games are actually very helpful up to a certain point, but at the addiction level, they're very damaging. And so and boys are far more likely to be addicted to video games than girls are. And so but they can win in a game type of way with a virtual hero. But then it comes to boy-girl time. And girls are not that interested in dating losers. So and so from the girl's perspective, the guy is a loser if he doesn't do well in anything, doesn't perform. And so the girls aren't interested in him. So what can he turn to that that gives him some sexual excitement without fear of rejection? Porn. Pornography is basically access to a variety of attractive women without fear of rejection at a price he can afford. And so but the problem with porn, there's a lot of problems with porn, but even leaving the moral ones aside, is the fact that his brain begins to be stimulated. Dopamine is stimulated, the more risk-taking is involved. And so he gets addicted to more and more risk-taking with women. And when some woman finally says, okay, I will maybe get into a sexual situation with you, she feels so used, so like treated like an object, so like he's not really loving her, but he's wanting her to do some type of performance thing that he saw on porn because this is the only way he knows to be stimulated. He's far more likely to not be able to get an erection, and the more fearful he is about that, the more he stays away from women. And so this whole, this then makes him more and more depressed. So he can't make good contact with people at school. He can't he can't impress the teachers. He feels his own parents are disappointed. He withdraws more and more into the porn, into the video game addiction, or he becomes so angry that nobody at school really gives a damn about him. No one's curious about his sensitivity. As a rule, this boy, if he's brought up predominantly by a mom, is far more likely to be sensitive. He's very likely to be intelligent. The more intelligent you are, the more you tend to think about sensitivity and things like that and analyze it and take it apart. And so this boy then feels like he is sensitive, he is intelligent, but nobody is appreciating him. And the anger can become enormous, the hurt and pain can become enormous. And to feel like Stephen Paddock did, that for one moment in my life, I'll make an impression on somebody. I'll get people to say, I wish I had paid more attention to Stephen. I wish I had, and sometimes those people are at school, and sometimes I think that's a motivation for the school shooting as well. And so, does that make sense, I'm saying? I want to deal with what we can do about this in schools. I went to Denmark recently and spent some time at the schools there. And one of the things that they do in first grade is to, first, second, and third grades, is to help boys and girls communicate. I teach couples communication classes all around the country, and I know very clearly that, the US rather, I know very clearly that the Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism, especially from a loved one, without becoming defensive. And so almost that's built into our biology for reasons I would have to spend more time to get into. But the problem is that in human relationships, becoming defensive keeps you from the person you love from feeling loved. It makes the person fear that they have to walk, and so your partner begins to walk on eggshells, fearing that they don't want to bring anything up that might upset you because it's only going to escalate. And with boys and girls in the first, second, and third grade, in Denmark, one of the things that they do is to teach, they have kids sit around in groups and talk about their feelings and their fears and what is involved in that process. And they, and instead of seeing the kids, their colleagues, their classmates as objects, they begin to see them as real human beings. It's very difficult to pick on somebody that you understand their heart, their passions, their fears, their feelings. You pick on objects, like when you prepare for war, you always objectify the people that you want to have be the enemy because it hurts less to be rejected by an object than it does to be rejected by full human beings. It's why women who feel rejected by a man will call him a jerk. It hurts less to be rejected by a jerk than it does to be rejected by a really talented, thoughtful women. It's why men, construction workers, will typically objectify women because it hurts less to be rejected by somebody that's an object than they know that as a construction worker, that attractive woman walking by, they don't feel is available to them. And so they feel the potential for being rejected. So this is, got off on that rejection thing there for a moment. So so one thing that the schools can do, I believe, that would be the most constructive is to prepare boys and girls to know how to communicate with each other. And in doing this, you're developing emotional intelligence in boys, which is the opposite of everything boys learn to do to become a hero. To become a hero, a boy had to be willing to be disposable, therefore he had to disconnect from his feelings. And because the more he felt, the less willing he would be willing to die. And so if we want to make progress with boys and girls, we have to make a transition from the traditional heroic intelligence of the past to health intelligence of the future. And especially for women who will be taking over to a greater degree the responsibilities of earning money. The more money a woman earns, the less she needs a man as a security blanket. So instead of seeking somebody that has money for her, which she still will do, especially if she's wants to be a mother and there needs to be children, but to a much lesser degree will she be financially dependent, and she'll be seeking out our sons who have, instead of financial intelligence, have emotional intelligence. As long as that emotional intelligence is not also devoid of financial intelligence. The women who want to be mothers very rarely marry a man who's reading The Boy Crisis in an unemployment line. Second thing that is really pivotal for schools to do is to begin to have major campaigns to hire male teachers, to make it extremely respectful for a man to be a teacher, to see a man who is a teacher as giving in a way that heroes give. We have to remember that biologically, men are trained to serve, to sacrifice. To protect. We will, if we are told the Nazis are coming, we will be willing to die to make sure we don't live under Nazi rule. Every single generation has had a war that men were willing to die in. So if you tell men you are needed as fathers, you are needed as male teachers, the men will respond, even if they are not paid that much. Firefighters, 93% of the firefighters in Canada are males. Very few of those males, almost all the very high percentage of those males are what? Volunteers. What's the pay of the volunteer fireman? Respect, honor, purpose. You offer a male respect, honor, and purpose, and you will get him to be a teacher, and you will get him to be a father. We have to create a concept called father warrior, where a male who is a father is overcoming all the barriers in this world, in the developed nations, for a man to be a full-time father. So a man can walk, a young man can walk into a party and a woman says to him, what would you like to be? What is your profession? He says, I'd like to actually be a full-time father. That she doesn't just walk away and never come back, and the only person that comes to him is the reporter. So that's a whole cultural change that needs to occur. That cultural change needs to happen and start happening in our school systems, where it's not just father warrior in theory. It's training boys to be empathetic as part of father warring. It's training boys to know what their just dad-style parenting is that is needed. It's training boys to do checks and balance parenting and communication with the mother. So it's all this that has to happen in the school curriculum. That's those things, that emotional intelligence is more useful for boys than the next trigonometry exam. Third, recess. We've already talked about that. Fourth, vocational education. In Japan, 1/4 of the Japanese male population and about 1/5 of the Japanese female population are in tracks called vocational education. When they graduate, 99.6% get jobs. In the United States and much of Canada, boys who are not academically inclined are oftentimes failing out of school. And boys who fail out of high school, or the equivalent thereof, are when they're in their 20s, they're about 20, the unemployment rate is about 22% versus 0.4%. So you get a sense of the importance of restoring vocational education to the schools. It's another major area. Next is unconscious bias training. When guys, I know Daniel here, And if I were to go, Daniel, you're perfect spirits to be a Santa Claus this year, but it would be really nice if you earned a few pennies. What have I just done with Daniel? I did a wit-covered put-down. The trading of masculinity the commerce of masculinity is the trading of wit-covered put-downs. Why would I ever do a put-down with somebody I like? How many guys know that you can begin to trust somebody, and when you trust somebody, you can play with them like that? Raise your hand if that's common to you. How many women have gone, why are you doing that with your friend? That's not really very respectful. And the guys do that because historically, that was the way of preparing ourselves to be able to be successful. We were successful when people we could trust and people who were successful needed to be able to handle criticism in order to be able to be successful. Find a politician who doesn't handle criticism. It's a prerequisite to the process. It also is a way of saying, I feel close to you, I can play with you. It also is a way of saying, I want to test out who's the prima donna here, who's not. If I'm a firefighter, the more hazardous the professions, the more the commerce of wit-covered put-downs exists. The more hazardous the professions, the more somebody needs to know that somebody can be teased and is not sort of like all fearful of being violated, but needs a trigger warning, or it feels like something's a microaggression. These are things that are just like really alienating to the hazardous professions, because they know that if somebody needs a trigger warning before they're hurt or in order to be a friend with, that if there's a collapse of the roof and I'm a firefighter, I'm not going to think that the person who needs a trigger warning is going to risk his or her life to save mine. It's an instinct that firefighters and all hazardous professions know. And so what the answer to that is not just continue doing wit-covered put-downs. There's a price to doing wit-covered put-downs, which is there's a shield that happens. The response needs to be, rather than a hashtag #MeToo from women only, it needs to be not a hashtag #MeToo monologue, it needs to be a hashtag #MeToo dialogue. What makes the workplace right for women? What makes it right for men? Let's talk about it. Let's not make HR HER. I'd like to end by looking at I was talking about the training to be a hero and the training to be willing to sacrifice one's life. And the social bribe, when we use words like hero, those words are social bribes. When our son is playing football or ice hockey and has hurt themselves and we cheer for them to go out and play again and maybe hurt themselves again, maybe get a second or third concussion, we have to really check ourselves as to the degree to which we're making our son feel like we're proud of them for risking their lives, preparing them to be a hero in preparation for them being willing to be disposable, to be that type of hero that we've done in the past. The child-raising process for the future is in tension with the child-raising process from the past. I hope the boy crisis makes clear hundreds of different areas of that tension that we have to sort of re-examine before we that do not need to go from this extreme to that extreme, but need to have some balance. Just think of this auditorium right here. Let's look up at the ceiling, look up at all the parts of this auditorium, and think of the members of what I call the death professions, that is the hazardous professions, who risked their lives to build this auditorium and every skyscraper and bridge we have in Toronto. The young men who became each of these professions I'm going to mention are among the most hazardous professions in Canada. The young men who became one of the loggers who cut the wood, or one of the drivers of the 18-wheelers who brought the logs and wood here. who took that wood in their 18-wheelers over bridges built by welders, finally arriving at this construction site at which each building was built by construction workers and roofers, all among Canada's death professions. We've been talking about the word masculinity only with what Oxford University, the Oxford Dictionary now says was the word of the 2018, which is the word toxic. And toxic and masculinity have gone hand in hand in our descriptions in this last year, without ever looking at the buildings that have been built. The fact that our dads did make more money than our moms so that they could sacrifice making that additional money to earn money that their children could spend so that they wouldn't have to be the Uber driver or the construction worker, that they'd have more freedom, to have more opportunities and more education that they could ever hope to have. So in conclusion, we've seen that as developed nations have solved one problem, survival, they've allowed new freedoms that have created new problems. And the boy crisis has grown in the fertile soil of families without dads. We have seen but a dozen or so of the more than 70 ways that I discuss in the boy crisis that dad-deprived boys are indeed deprived. We've seen that boys who hurt us. And we've seen why we haven't cared about boys being hurt until they hurt us. Although our sons are damaged even more than our daughters by the loss of family, father, or any emotional connection, every boy who is a failure to launch leaves a heterosexual woman without a man who is worthy of her love. We speak today in the safety of this auditorium built at the cost of the safety of men and the cost of the broken hearts of the families who love them. For the health of both sexes, let's end the era of shaming men who have been willing to die so that our families could live or live better. When it comes to men and women, we are all in the same family boat. When only one sex wins, both sexes lose. Thank you.
Dr. Farrell, thank
Yes.
you so much for coming to talk to us tonight. We're not quite done yet. We have two more things before the end. I've been told that Dr. Farrell has a bit of an activity prepared for everyone, and after that there will be an opportunity for some questions. Before that,
I'll be doing an audience participation, 100% audience participation activity, which will be by far the highlight of the evening.
There we go.
You've paid your dues now by listening to me, but I'll explain more later.
You've heard it from the man himself. Before we get there, though, I do have a couple more announcements. Firstly, Justin has asked me to remind you, now that you've had an opportunity to hear the talk, that part of the package you were given earlier tonight includes a donation code. There are options for single donations or monthly donations, and those will go to help the many, many good things that CAFE is doing at the moment. The second, and this is something I didn't know until Justin told me today, is that Dr. Farrell is going to be hosting a lunch event tomorrow, and anyone who sets up a monthly donation of $25 a month or more will have the opportunity to attend that. If you are interested, speak to someone at the front on the way out, and you'll be able to get all the details for that. Third, and lastly, is Linda Yondley in the audience here. Can I get a hand up? Come on up. Linda is working on a Boys Achievement Initiative, and we figured that because of the great turnout tonight, this would be an opportunity to let her say a few words to a crowd that we knew would be interested.
Thank you all for coming to see Dr. Farrell tonight and supporting the U of T Men's Issue and Awareness Society and its lecture series. And also thank you to the Canadian Association for Equality for supporting and being a primary sponsor of this event. I'm here because I strongly believe in what CAFE is doing. I believe so strongly that I've now joined with CAFE's president, Dr. James Brown, and with another high school teacher, John Mason, and we are leading a committee to enhance boys' achievement. So, you know, my interest and concern for this sort of came out from my experience and my son's experience in the education system many years ago. I saw my son run off to the first day of school. He thought it was just the greatest thing in the world. And within a few months, he did not want to go to school anymore. And I saw, you know, my friends and their sons starting to become underachieving boys. And I didn't understand what was going on. And I started to see and notice that what's really happening, a lot of what Dr. Farrell mentioned tonight, I've experienced, and I think most of you as sons may have also experiencing these things where the education system is not friendly to boys and their kinetic energy. They've removed a lot of the balls and the gym equipment out of the recess time. Boys aren't allowed to run on the grass. And a lot of things where boys need these type of things to burn out their energy so they can come back in and pay attention in the classroom again. And I know some of you as parents have probably been told, my son won't sit still, your son's not paying attention, maybe you should have him tested for ADHD, all these type of things we've all heard for our sons. Now, the thing is, as we've learned tonight too, is we now have the statistics to back this up where the education system is failing our boys. We're finding that more boys fail at a ratio of 2 to 1 to girls in recent Canadian schools. Males are more likely to be school dropouts. They're vastly outnumbered in our post-secondary education systems. There's a real push to send girls to university, but not boys. There are programs encouraging girls where the universities come on to the school campuses and encourage girls, but not there for the boys. And all this results in, as we heard tonight, very high suicide rates among boys at a ratio of 4 to 1. It's really time to make a change. So what is CAFE doing about this? We're doing a few things. One of the things we started this year is an annual award for the most improved boy. And what that means is we take a look at the boys in school, and we look for ones that have improved, most improved academically between grade 8 and grade 9, but also that are involved in extracurricular activities. So we did 2 awards this year, one to the Port Credit Secondary School and one to the Holy Family Catholic School. The other thing we're doing is we're providing a consultation to the Ministry of Education. They've recently come out on their website. You can all take a look, and they've asked for public support and any comments you may have. There's 5 particular questions I have on the list, and you have between now and December 15th to go in and submit you know, what you feel about the education system, maybe to talk about some of the issues we heard here tonight. So we're going to be submitting a submission asking for the educational approach that provides diversity of learning experiences required to meet the full range of both boys and girls. Put an end to programs that only support girls in our school systems and open it up to both boys and girls. We want to make sure that both boys and girls have equal opportunity in our school system. The other thing that we're going to be asking them for is to hire more male teachers. Boys need role models, and we really learned that tonight as well. We're also meeting with researchers from the Boys Education Strategy at the Toronto District School Board. We're meeting with them to share information and see how we can work together to make some of these activities come through. And we're also here educating you on the boys' crisis. So please take a look at our website. There's some resources at the back. And I fully support what CAFE is doing. I very passionately believe in this, and I think it's time to help our boys and our men. So if you feel as passionately as I do about this, hopefully you'll feel you'd like to support us in any way you can. We'd really appreciate it. At the end of the evening, at the back of the table, you can talk to myself or John Mason about our submission to the Ontario education system. If you have some suggestions, we have a sign-up sheet there. If you want to submit your own opportunity, that's great too. Okay, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Linda. And I would really encourage people to speak to Linda and John on the way out. I have spoken to them about this issue, and they are both very passionate and very knowledgeable about it. For now, though, Dr. Farrell, you've promised a highlight, so let's see what you deliver.
All right. I'm going to ask you to all close your eyes with me. I won't be closing my eyes. I'm going to ask you to find a time when you noticed a glint in your dad's eye, a time that he was completely joyful, relaxed, not focused on correcting you or lecturing you. For example, maybe he had a favorite joke he would always tell, and you begin to sort of roll your eyes when he began to retell that joke. But he knew that that joke would always make people laugh and sort of admire him, give him attention. Or he was great at telling stories for the same type of reason. Or he was really had that glint in his eye when he was fly fishing, skiing, golfing. Maybe it was gardening. Maybe it was hiking through some really backwoods. Maybe it was singing in this local chorus, or just plain singing, or acting, or painting, or playing in a band, or playing with your children if you're old enough for that to be relevant, or mentoring somebody, or helping somebody out, maybe helping even the homeless, making something useful or creative in the garage maybe, or flying in a small plane at sunset, or cooking turkey for the family at Thanksgiving. Maybe you don't recall any of those glints directly, but maybe you looked at an old family album, and before you were born and your siblings were born, you saw the glint in pictures from your dad's and mom's honeymoon. So search for that glint, for what ignited your dad's spirituality. In a sense, I'm asking you to find your dad's soul. If you didn't notice your dad, if you didn't know your dad, if you didn't know your dad, imagine whatever your image is, that has a lot to do with your relationship with your dad. If you feel you don't know what created the glint in your father's eyes, I'm going to ask you to do a best guess. You can open your eyes now, and I'm going to share what I mean by the best guess and how important that is. I did this experience once, a number of times, but once some years ago, I was walking in California in a street, and some guy came up to me and said, "Are you that guy that does the workshops, Warren Farrell, I think it is?" "Yes, that's right, Warren Farrell, you got it." "Well, can I share a story with you?" He goes, I go, "Yeah. I did that experience that you asked us to do. It was before Father's Day, and I decided to ask my dad on Father's Day what created the glint in his eye, and what he really would have loved to have done if he could have done anything he wanted to with his life." And his response was, "You attending those New Age California workshops again, your airy-fairy stuff. Jim, you will become a man when you stop asking, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And you stop doing what you need to, you start knowing what you need to do, what you really have. Being a man is not having a dream. It's fulfilling obligations and fulfilling responsibilities. I guess, Jimmy, you'll never understand that." And he said, at that moment, I was furious at you. I felt you should have known better than even to have us ask questions like that of our dads. And he said, just as I was feeling those thoughts, my dad started crying. And I had never understand more, and I had never seen my dad cry except when my mom passed away prematurely. And my dad, that was the only time he'd ever let himself cry, and now I'm seeing him cry again. And he saw that I was concerned, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "It's okay, Jim." And I said, "What do you mean it's okay? It's not okay if you're crying." No, he said, "I'm crying for different reasons. I guess I just didn't think that anybody would ever care enough to ask." So I'm asking you to care enough to ask about what created the glint in your dad's eye. If your dad's not alive, you can ask it in your mind's eye, and that will have an impact on your relationship with your dad, how much you feel loved and how much you appreciate the sacrifices. But if he didn't, if he is alive, I'll encourage you to ask him directly after this experience, after we go through this experience and you know how to play it, how to work it out with him. So I'm going to be asking you now to get into groups of 3. Do not start anything, but I'll ask you to get into groups of 3 without the person. If you're here with somebody, get into a group of 3 without that person you're here with, so that way you can share both of your experiences later with this person and double your learning process. If you have the option to, or you can do it, get together with at least one person from the other gender in your group. Do not start anything until I'll give you the next instruction to start. Just right now, just find the group of 3. Can you make the sound more powerful during this experience? Yes, up as high as it can be, so that I can interrupt the noise. Raise your hand if you do not have a group of 3. Okay, look around, find the person whose hand is raised, and invite them to join your group. Some people are shy. Okay, there's 2 people here. You need a third. You found the third. There's 2 people here. And is there a third person that's available to join these 2 people here? Ideally a woman. We need one more person here. Looking for one human being. Can you come up and join these 2 here? Oh, you have 2. You're also looking for a third. Is there one more group of people that... Okay, very good. Come on down and join these 2. That's fine. We can work with that. We're getting desperate now. Oh, and you don't. Oh, this back there. Those 2 guys at the very back need somebody. So, guys. Oh, they just found somebody. Is there anyone else that is not in a group of 3? All right. Do you need somebody? There we go. You have 2. Look at the guy and the woman that's raising their hand there. They desire you enormously. They desire you. You have, yeah, these, okay, very good. Yes. Yes. It is ideal, yes. You need an extra person? You have 2? Oh, you have an extra person, okay. Is there someone that needs an extra person? Okay, all right. I'll now ask you to sit down if you can, but if you can't, then stay standing. Sit on the edge, but sit in a triangular fashion so you can all see each other. So, so this group here will have to have somebody facing the other one. So just sit on the back of the chair or something. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to think about what created the glint in your dad's eye. And I'm going to be asking you to share with the other 2 people in your group what's your best guess as to how did you come to that conclusion that this was the glint in your dad's eye? When did you see that? When did you feel that in your life? And tell that story to the group. And then I'm going to be asking you to share with the group what your dad actually did for a living. Now here's the trick. If your dad loved to fly a small plane, let's say, and he loved the sunset and the clouds coming through the sun, and he wrote poetry based on that, and then you say, my dad became a pilot. He did just what he wanted to do. Understand the enormous difference between what creates the glint in your eye, which was in that father's case, the poetry, the sunset, versus flying for a living, which is FAA regulations or the equivalent of FAA regulations and responsibilities and timing and no freedom, complete responsibility. Or if your dad loved cooking turkey at Thanksgiving and when everybody sat around at the table, your dad seemed to have a glint in his eye. And then you say, oh, he did exactly what he wanted to do. He became a chef. The glint in your dad's eye came from being with family, cooking for family, not for cooking for strangers. There's almost always a difference between what creates a glint in your dad's eye versus what one does for a living. So don't fall into the trap of something familiar to his area of glint being what sustained that glint. So I'm now going to ask you to, is there anyone that has a question about that? Okay, so you're going to be doing 3 things with the group. Sharing what created the glint in your sharing what was the glint in your dad's eye. Second, what created that glint, your story behind that. And third, what your dad actually did for a living. I'm going to ask you to have one person in the group who has a watch with a second hand to be the facilitator for the group, so we keep the timing in good shape. Is there any group that does not have a watch with a second hand? No, somebody with a watch, right? Or it can be an iPhone with a second. Okay, I'm going to ask each group to choose. I'm going to ask each group to choose a facilitator, ideally the person with the watch, but if that person with the watch, with the second hand, does not have good boundary enforcement, switch it over to somebody that does have good boundary enforcement, okay? Okay, facilitator. Yes, I'll give you that exact. You are going to look, you're going to give each person in the group 90 seconds, but at the end of 80 seconds, I'm going to ask you to say 10 seconds to that person. And so they have a 10-second warning. And if at the end of 10 seconds they're still talking, just say hold for a minute and then move on to the next person and then move on to the next person so that we keep to the same amount of time per group. Okay, people with the person with the watch with the second hand, look carefully now at the other 2 people in your group. And start with the person who looks most alert. Okay. Ready, get set, go. Edward, why don't you?
Just need to know how it looks.
Absolutely.
I had known you were going to run this beforehand. So
Yes.
That's good. That's good. No, I'm still running around in the back.
Gotcha. Responsibilities.
Yeah, just my boss. But that's good. And not a single protest on this.
No,
as far as I know.
I didn't expect it to be.
We've been,
In Calgary, there's not even a hint of protest.
it's become mainstream to a large extent. We've finally gotten it through that these are real issues and
It'll become more mainstream when the government begins to start and the universities start responding to it.
so very strange. The government felt able to the strangest thing, the government felt able to is one of the most aggressive on this kind of stuff, despite being horrendous on just about every social issue.
Conservatives are more responsive to this, which is really progressives should no longer be calling themselves progressive. I think they've become, yeah.
That's a good point.
Take 10 more seconds to complete process.
What the job they used to do in Vancouver?
Oh, neat.
High-rise pressure washer.
Oh. Ready, hold. Ready, hold. I ask you to sit back down and reconnect. Give yourselves a hand for going through this. I'm going to ask you now to I'll ask the people who are standing just to sit down to join us. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if one of the things your dad wanted to do, or that created the glint in your dad's eye, was something to do with helping people, being in the arts, being in caring professions, doing things that were very caring for others. Raise your hand if that was one of your glints in your dad's eye. Music, yes. The arts, yes. Music, painting, singing, anything like that. And think about which professions are usually these, which sex dominates those professions? Women. Second, let me ask you now to just close your eyes again and imagine your mom and dad the moment you were born, or the moment the first child in your family was born, and projecting out the number of children that eventually would be born in your family. Make that an accurate projection, let's say. So if there were 3 children in your family, make believe that your mom and dad, when the first child was born, had a sense that they were going to have about 3 children. And they sat around and they started thinking, well, we'd love to have you do the glint in your eye, Dad. But does the glint in your eye, well, doing that, short of it becoming a profession in which it no longer becomes your glint, which would earn more? Just doing more of what made you happy and the glint in your eye? Or doing what your dad actually ended up doing for most of his life that earned the most money? Which did your dad actually end up doing, the glint in his eye or the earning of the money? And what type of decision would your parents have made if they wanted to be able to be sure that you and your sisters and brothers went to good schools, in a good neighborhood, had a good home, had many opportunities, that you had good health insurance that went above and beyond the normal into emergency mode if need be, sending you out of the country if need be. All the margin for error that parents have to figure on, which would your parents decide that your dad needed to do? I ask you to open your eyes and raise your hand if you think their decision would be more along the lines of your dad doing what he did versus glint in his eye. Just raise your hand. Raise your hand if your parents felt that your dad should do the glint in his eye no matter how much money it earned. Okay. And raise your hand if you didn't understand the question. Okay, so in almost every case, our dads did what our parents decided that our dads needed to do, what created the income to support the children in the family. And oftentimes that was without regard for the glint in their eyes. Most dads, like Jim's dad, don't even allow themselves to think about the concept of glint in your eye. How many men here who are dads sort of were actively searching for what will create the glint in your eye? A handful. The great majority of men just don't even allow themselves to think that way, because for them, like Jim's dad, life is not about the glint in the eye, it's about obligations and responsibilities. And that is okay. What is not okay is telling men that because they earned more money, that they have more power and privilege, as opposed to thanking them for taking the responsibility for and the obligations that led to their doing the road to high pay as a toll road, to doing those tolls that took them away from the family, that took them from experiencing the father's catch-22 of loving the family by being away from the love of the family. And that right now in our culture, in all developed nations, there is no appreciation for that sacrifice. That sacrifice is not different than mom's sacrifice in its ultimately, moms made sacrifices of their careers, and dads made their sacrifices in their careers. But to only understand the sacrifices of one sex is to really undervalue and to have boys, I see boys today going into high school and being ashamed that they're boys. Hearing the word, the only thing they associate with the word boys is toxic. Hearing things like toxic masculinity over and over again. Royce Mann's famous slam poem, that won the Hatch Award for the most creative slam poem. And after it won that award, it got circulated quite a bit. And the poem went something like, I knew I became a man when I was walking on the street, and in front of me was a woman, and she looked back at me, and she saw that I was a man, and she crossed the street to get away from me because I was a man. I wanted at that moment to always be like Peter Pan. I didn't want to become a man because I knew a man was a father, yes, a brother, yes, but also an attacker. He was mostly an attacker. 14-year-old. When somebody enters with that type of shame for being who he is, it doesn't take a mental health professional to know the damage that does. Okay. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to do some Q&A now, but I don't do Q&A the normal way. I will ask you to stand up, say your name, so I can speak to you as a person rather than as a lecture object. I feel like in this group of people here that real respect for you suggests that you all have contributions to make. I'll be leaving here Monday, but what will be here is each of you and I want you to sort of see who makes comments that you feel are intelligent and thoughtful and maybe align with you, and see that, and maybe make connection with them afterwards so that you have a stronger community here. And it's not just dependent upon me being here. I will, because of time, I'll only allow one comment per question, and then I'll give my perspective on it as well. You look like you had your hand about ready to be raised. Say your name. Name? Name?
Oh, sorry.
Jim?
And I do counseling, and I'm involved with street homeless youth.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with the Tavistock Institute agenda for social engineering?
I've only
Where
heard of it.
Yeah. It's in England, and at the end of the Second World War, all the Nazi propaganda programs were transferred to it. And every time there's new developments in knowledge of brain and mind and socialization, etc., it's transferred in there, and the programs are improved. What we're seeing, including with the boys and feminism, is an implemented social engineering to, in a sense, disempower the males at this particular juncture. So I bring that to your attention because I thought maybe people might want to take a look on the net at the Tavistock Institute and Dr. John Coleman, who talks about these programs of social engineering, which is then implemented through the universities and, let's call it, the Commonwealth nations.
So this
is a reality.
And making a very positive contribution to the development of boys?
No, it's the opposite.
The
I mean,
opposite,
what
right.
you're seeing with the boys is an implemented agenda.
Okay.
If you look at the Second World War, which was the last time the females were in abundance in the workplace, I don't want to say the word capitalist, but those who are in charge of the greater amount of money, instead of waiting till the war happens, they implement the females into the workplace in preparation for a world war. So they keep moving closer to that peg of that, in which case they send the males off to be slaughtered.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim, very much. Anybody have a comment on that, or before we move on to the next? Okay. Yes, you had a comment on that. Say your name. Oh, you have a different question. Okay. All right, since there aren't any comments, and that was basically a comment, I'm just going to leave that there since I don't know a lot about the Tavistock Institute. Anybody else have a question? Just raise your hand. Okay. All right.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Say your name.
My name's Jerry. I just wondered what you thought about prenuptial agreements, especially since the courts seem to be biased against men, I believe. I'm particularly thinking of one case in Toronto that was celebrated in the media about 5 years ago. It was a huge article in Toronto Life. It was about the McCain family, a huge potato empire family, where the prenuptial agreement, many of the provisions were set aside by a female judge. And I'm just wondering what you think about that. And it seems that some of the judges are elderly, some of them are ill, they're mentally ill. Canadian Mental Health Association says 25% of the population has a major psychiatric illness.
This is for the whole population or the judges?
The whole population. Judges, I think, judges and doctors and lawyers is probably a higher percentage. So,
no bias. You want to make sure.
I'm not biased. No, I'm just saying the facts.
So your question then is, what do I think of prenuptial agreements?
What do you think of prenuptial agreements and the legal system that seems to be biased against men?
Okay. So let's take the legal system being biased against men, because that's the larger issue. So anybody have a comment on the legal system being biased against men? Say your name. And can you stand up?
My name's Ken Maynard, and yeah, I kind of had the same type of experience like that gone through. But since I've went through my separation and divorce, starting in 2010, I became a divorce mediator. And I'm baffled.
You became a divorce what? Mediator. Right.
And I'm baffled to this day when The wife offers mediation to the husband, and it's sort of this common culture that the family courts are against males, and the husband says, F you, see you in court. And I'm going, whoa, buddy. But it happens so regularly.
Yes.
So, you know, it's a very complex issue.
Yes. Good. I'll give a comment and then I'll open up the question to a woman who would like to ask next. I do a lot of expert witness testimony around the U.S. and Toronto, Canada, and I have seen a great deal of bias in the court against males being equally able to have an equal amount of time with the children. What concerns me most is the amount of research that I've done on this, and it's so clear that everybody wins when both parents are about equally involved with the children. But the four must-dos, just hold for a second, Daniel, I'll be right back. The four must-dos that must happen after divorce, that the courts really need to be educated on and enforce are these. We have enormous evidence that you'll see in the Boy Crisis book on that there needs to be approximately an equal amount of time between mom and dad after divorce if the children have had to have a reasonable chance of doing well. The mother and father needs to live about 20 minutes drive time from each other so the children don't resent the parent that they're going to because they're losing activities or friends' birthday parties or whatever. Number three, that the children are not able to overhear any bad-mouthing or detect any bad-mouthing from mother to dad or dad to mother. Detect any bad-mouthing. Let us say I'm on the phone with you and you're my ex and I'm talking about you and I know that the children cannot hear me because they're in the next room. But I have a different tone of voice when I'm talking about mom. And the children are telling me that I interview and talk with that they can pick that different tone of voice up. And secondly, if let's say you're my son and you come home and say, I say, how was your time with mom? And you say, really good, mom did this with me, and I sort of like just minimally pay attention to you. That's a type of bad-mouthing. When the son can detect over and over again that when he or she, or the daughter can detect when he or she talks about mom in a positive way, they get less attention than when they talk about mom in a negative way that I pick up. And so so bad-mouthing is both words and body language that rewards or punishes the child for not being negative about the other parent. And finally, this is really important, that the parents have a consistent, dependable couples counseling or relationship counseling. Even in poor neighborhoods where the therapists are not PhDs, but they just have MSWs or MFTs, the children benefit enormously by the couple not just getting together when there's an emergency, and therefore they have to come to a quick conclusion and they don't have a chance to really understand the best intent of their partner. But long-term relationship counseling has proven to be one of the four ingredients that are four must-dos if your goal is not just to have a better life for you, but the best possible life for your children. Okay, let's see, I promised a woman next. Say your name.
Hi, my name's Maria.
Maria.
I was just wondering, in the era of equality, why do we say that boys need boys need male teachers?
Okay, so the question, say your name again.
Maria.
Maria. Maria's question was, in the year of talking about equality and being in a year of equality, why do I say boys need male teachers? Anybody have a comment on that? Yes, say your name. Yes, good.
As a male teacher, I get one of a few different ways. They think you're either some sort of magic talisman. You walk into the classroom and just abracadabra, hocus pocus, you'll solve all the issues that took the last decade and a half to come to fruition by your presence. Or second, from the students, you're either some sort of older brother, cool uncle, because I could name one or two of the songs that they listen to, and when they say certain words, I know what they mean. Or three, then I'm the trigger, I get the negative daddy issues, and I've been there for 17 minutes, and they hate me already, and I'm thinking, I just got here. So as for boys, why you need men as teachers, look at the teacher staff. Take as much time as you need to count on your hands how many black male teachers you had from primary school to high school. 0? How many male teachers you had? 3, 4, 5, half a dozen maybe? It's hard to be something when you don't see that thing. So yes, I'm not against girls or sisters wanting to become engineers, but look at nursing, look at teachers, look for males, you won't find them. When I tell them I work with youth, people look at me sort of, why? Why do you want to be a teacher? Or they look at me and says, do you get a background check? And I'm going, twice a year? Why do you ask? So why male teachers matter? Be something when you can see something. Not that it's not impossible to be something that you haven't seen, but it's a lot easier when you see that thing and you see that thing in a positive light. If you have a drug dealer in the community and he has lots of money, lots of women, and lots of cars, you can emulate that because it appears as successful. But if you don't see any male teachers, why would you consider becoming one yourself? When it's much easier for you to drop out of school or become an engineer.
Thank you. Really good answer. A much better answer than I could have given. So, Maria, I definitely don't want there to be only male teachers. I hope you didn't interpret me as saying that. Let's have Maria have the microphone for a moment so her voice can be heard.
No, I just thought, I don't think it matters. I think if you have a good female teacher and you're an ambitious student, the teacher, like the gender shouldn't matter.
Yes, okay. So I'll do a little bit of on that now. We do know, Maria, that the gender of a teacher matters, but it especially matters if a boy comes from a mom-only home, and he goes to a mostly female-only elementary school. He then goes through the early years of his life without ever having a constructive male role model. And those boys are far more vulnerable to being seduced by gang leaders, to have some identity, or being seduced by drug dealers to be able to get free money and be able to sort of have some respect and have some identity by authoritarian leaders. Boys tend to be, Maria, in search for some type of strength, but that's some type of strength that won't just allow them to do what they want to do when they want to do it, but some type of strength that is requiring of them to be more than they want, than they already are. Some type of direction, somebody that's exacting consequences. This can be done by female teachers, but as you were saying, it really is helpful for a male to see somebody like himself when he doesn't see anybody at home like himself. And so the inner cities are really filled with, in the African American community, as we know in the United States, 73% of children do not have fathers at home at all. And so those children go through to the schools where there's almost all females there, and that's an extremely dangerous combination. So we need to obviously help all teachers be respected and paid well, but we also need to make it remember what I said about firefighters. You start honoring men who become male teachers, and even though the pay isn't as much as it might be to sell insurance or whatever, there will be many, many more men who will be delighted to get into teaching. Just a takeoff on that. And men's desire to care. When the Pew Research Center, PEW, which is a liberal research center, asked these are men who were working full-time, whether they would prefer these men to work full-time, or they would prefer to be full-time involved with their children, not part-time, but full-time involved with their children. 49% of the males who were working full-time said they would prefer to be full-time involved with their children, but they needed to earn the money. So there is out there in the male psyche an enormous desire to be involved with the caring professions, but we've put all our emphasis on the STEM professions and the importance of women getting into those, which my former wife was a vice president of IBM and American Express, and I'm very much in favor of my own wife. My wife of the last quarter century owns her own PR firm, so I'm very supportive of women being involved in their own businesses. But and in the STEM professions. But we also need to get men, our next generation of men, involved in the caring professions as well. So, thank you. Let's see, somebody. Yes, gentleman in the very back.
My name's Kaleem.
You got a piano introduction?
Yeah.
Say your name.
My name's Kaleem. And my question's not only for you, but for the men who are teachers here. When I look at, so I'm not in the education field, but when I look at, and I think when people look at the education field and the places where teachers are trained, places like OISE, places like Teachers College, especially those prominent ones, the sorts of discourses which are very hostile to males in the schooling system seem to be like particularly acute in those sorts of places, in the places where teachers are being trained. And so someone like me from the outside is very hesitant to say, okay, I would want to be a teacher. I would want to put myself into that environment. And so I'm wondering if you think...
Cleve, I'm sorry. What is it that is dominant there that makes it...
like discourses that are very like identity politics, divisive discourses
so
that contain a lot of political correctness, very anti-male ideas, right? So I'm wondering, is that impression like right, or like is it difficult for men to become teachers, to go through those sorts of institutions? Or thoughts or advice on that, or is that just a misperception? And also, if so, then what sort of changes, you talked about changes that need to happen in schools, what sort of changes would need to happen in the places where teachers are trained?
Very astute question.
To encourage males to become teachers.
Are there any teachers here? Yes, from your experience? Yes. Can we give the, excuse me, sir? With the microphone, you were desired. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Mike, okay? To answer this nice question and that good comment over there, when I was in high school, back in the 90s, many years ago, they integrated late into my high school time the kindergartens in with us, which changed the high school dramatically. So it became K through 12 or grade 12 or 13, right? So they introduced a parenting class at that time, which I took. A whole bunch of girls, me, and 2 other guys. And the 2 other guys dropped the course almost instantly because the default assumption for all of us males was that we had to have an unhealthy interest in children to have wanted to take that, okay?
How did you get that? How did you get that message?
Well, I got that message because from some people it was explicit, shamelessly explicit and stated, okay? And then from others it was implicit but clear.
And share with us how implicit came across to you.
Well, it's been a long, long time since high school. But this, it became clear to me. I'll first explain my experience when I stayed in the class despite everything. Especially since the other 2 young men dropped out and I was the only male left, all the female students taking that course had 1 to 2 kids each. Every single boy, half of the entire class, was hungry for my attention, gravitating towards me, so I had to handle half the class, okay? And there were 2 kids in particular, because I promised myself I wouldn't shy away from difficult kids. 2 kids in particular that in grade 1 at the age of 6 were on a bad track. They were good kids, already getting into difficulty for mild rambunctiousness. And through my taking a special interest in them, probably changed their educational career forever. And I couldn't go into teaching for multiple reasons, one of which was I knew I could not want to stand 40 years of a career with people looking over my shoulder all the time, despite no wrongdoing on my part. And I hated school so much, I didn't want to go through a BA and teacher's college, because I'd already been poisoned to my educational experience, okay, and had become an autodidact, self-taught person by my teenage years, okay? So this was 25 years ago, when it's much worse now from what I can get secondhand. And I think that fills in both sides of the picture here.
Thank you, Mike. I wish I could say something very positive and Cleve in relation to your extremely important comment. But the most positive thing I can say is that everything I have been hearing verifies the tripling or quadrupling in both teachers' colleges, places of education, all of the social sciences, and the worst areas, the masters in social work programs, where the the negativity toward masculinity and the suspicion toward anybody wanting to be a teacher is great. In Canada, the recent 5 or 6 year old survey that was done said that about 27, 28, I'm forgetting, upper 20s % of people who wished to be elementary school teachers who were males decided not to go into elementary school teaching because of the fear that people would think that they were molesters. Now, the really important thing that Michael said that may have just missed us is that the boys who did the best were the ones he gave special attention to. There are very few kids who really learn as much about the subject matter. The subject matter grows a kid a lot less effectively than a teacher singling out him or her and saying, you have this special gift, you have this special talent. That special attention is so pivotal in a child feeling it has something special, especially if that's a boy, especially if it's a boy from a mom-only home, which even though the mom may be great as a mom in so many ways, that boy is still looking for some male that's saying something good about him. The common thing I hear from all male teachers is that the boys in the class just gather around me like I'm a celebrity. But it's exactly that when you are a caring, loving male, that you want to take a kid on your knee. You want to hold them when they're crying. You want to be able to cuddle them. And all of those things, one picture by a cell phone of the man cuddling a girl especially on his knee, jeopardize, and if it's a boy, it's, what about those priests that get molested? And so either way, the male's career from just one parent in one time in a 20-year history could say something and the school would feel pressured into letting that father go, and the newspapers would want the headline, and suddenly that male's career is in jeopardy, and his reputation is in jeopardy. And so this is something that I hope here a number of you have the courage to stand up against and to get involved with CAFE, get involved with some organization that's responsible, dependable, and caring, and begin to fight this. Because if our education system is not helping these boys discover themselves when they don't have a dad to help them discover themselves, we are really setting ourselves up for a very for many failures to launch.
I remember the example now.
Yes, go ahead.
If you're still interested.
No, our interest faded in 2 minutes.
Well, I remember being in the janitor's room where, I used to sit and chat, and the guidance counselor that day also happened to be there, both male. And one of these two young boys in question, he saw me, ran into the janitor's room where I was sitting in the chair, jumped in my lap. I think he did give me a kiss on the cheek, which took me completely by surprise, because in my generation, open affection wasn't a thing that we did. So it was new to me that someone would even contemplate that. But his generation, different story. But even though the janitor and the guidance counselor aren't the types to have judged me or worried about anything, especially since they knew me, it did come into stark relief that things could happen totally to my surprise, which would be career ending.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah.
We have the same phenomenon also in the Boy Scouts where, you know, there's understandable reasons for these phenomena, but it's also something we have to really be careful that there's an old saying good cases make bad laws, because we make a case to prevent something from happening, but then it has unintended consequences, like Michael is talking about. So a woman who has her hand raised. Do we have any women with their hand raised? Yes, this young woman right here. Let's get some generational diversity here too.
Time for just,
Yeah, right.
just one last question, so this will have to be.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
Very straightforward question. So when you're talking about absent fathers, in your research or in any research you encountered, did you notice the difference between like fathers who would have like willingly left, deliberately sort of abandoned the child versus like a child whose father died?
Yes.
Would there be a difference
absolutely.
there?
Yes, anybody have any experience or want to answer that question? Somebody that hasn't talked yet, or spoken yet? Yes. Say your name. Andy, we want you to have the microphone.
My girlfriend in college, her father was killed in an airplane accident when they were small children, and the mother raised all of the children without any issue whatsoever. They all were college educated. He left a little bit of a life insurance policy, and there was six girls and one boy, and they all turned out just fine. The mother, took over, and the children knew that the father loved them, and they replaced the lack of the father with education, with musical education, college degrees, and they kept themselves busy. So it doesn't always work in a negative way if the father's not around. I mean, the people can have a father and turn out to be mass murderers as well too. At one point, the decision is in your own mind. Okay.
Thank you.
That's the answer to that. While I have the mic for 1 second here, I would just like to thank you for your contribution, and
thank you.
Also I think the male's identity has been deliberately stripped from all of us for some reason whatsoever. And I'll try to make it brief, but during the Korean War, the soldiers were coming back who were imprisoned by the Koreans, and the military realized that they were coming back with an attitude from propaganda that had been used on them. And the CIA wanted to know what they were using to make these soldiers come back against their own country. So they did experiments. They came up here, they were experimenting on Canadians with LSD. But this all goes back to what Jim was saying here about the Tavistock.
Try to make this brief because we're needing to.
They have been using military indoctrination on the public since that time. And it came by way of cultural Marxism, and it entered the schools. It's like a virus. It's like a viral infection. And I think the only way to end it is to identify it, like you're doing, and just to stop it wherever possible.
Thank you.
Like Dr. Jordan Peterson says, if you identify it in the classroom where your teacher is saying something bad about a man.
Let me get back to Jessica's points here, so I don't, because Ed has mentioned that he wanted this to be the last question. Jessica, excuse me. Your core point, as I understood it, was that how many fathers are leaving of their own accord versus how many feel like they are not able to be equally involved as dads. Is that right?
No. The question is rather, is there a difference in the psychological consequence when you know your father chose to leave versus he died and it wasn't deliberate?
Yes, very good. I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying my question. And the answer is yes. So when children are in, or you saw this with Barack Obama, his father was not there, and mom always told stories about the father as a hero, as somebody who was really very talented, who was a charismatic person, who was the leader in his community. And even though, and then he had a huge amount of time with his grandmother and grandfather. Well, that's not ideal, but at least what Barack Obama was hearing was that he, the core of Barack Obama, whose eyes and nose and ears and walk was a lot like his dad's, that he was inherently a heroic personality. And when a dad dies in war, the consequences for the children, for example, or dies of a car accident or something, especially if he is doing something in the process of dying that is heroic, the children have a different type of image to look up to and grow into. The most damaging preventable thing is the combination of a divorce where the mother moves with a new man out of state, away from where the biological father is, and the message to the son is three things. One is that the father has abandoned them because he doesn't come as often as he could. Number two is that the father is a narcissist and or a liar and irresponsible. And that child looks in the mirror and begins to pick up the feelings that if maybe the father is that way, I am, after all, the person with the hair, the nose, the eyes, the body language of my dad. Maybe I am inherently a liar, irresponsible, and a narcissist. After all, I am looking in the mirror. And so that's where the biggest problems are. Thank you for clarifying your question, Jessica. I heard from Ed that I have to stop. Is that correct, or am I okay with another question?
Unfortunately, we've already gone on about 10 minutes longer than we had budgeted.
Okay.
This
I'm sorry.
always tends to happen. I'm very sorry that we can't get to absolutely everyone, but I know I've seen about a dozen different hands up on top of the people we've already been able to hear from.
And I will be signing books outside. I'll say one thing about my signing books. I'm a little bit like I am here. I'll be asking you a little bit about yourself, and incorporating that into the inscription. And so I'll be asking you to wait a little bit longer while I sign the books. And Dan, I'll be happy to respond to your question outside too.
Dr. Farrell, honestly, my question would be better for this whole community, and it was one simple question. You and I both know suicide rates, they are atrocious. Men make up 75 to 80% of the suicide rates in all Western nations, okay? Now, in those Western nations, the suicide rates for males is about the same rate as car fatalities, total car fatalities. Canada, United States, Australia, and England. What's it going to take for society to wake up and address that issue? That's my question, because out there I see all kinds of organizations like MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, SAS, Students Against Drunk Driving. What's it going to take for society to wake up to this issue? That at the end of the day, 75 to 80% of the time, it's our mothers and daughters left burying our sons and fathers.
Yes.
Right off the thing. That was my question to you, sir, and I think that it should have been for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think Dan, the brief answer is that, yeah, I wanted you to be respected by my answering it since we did create that. The brief answer is that as long as we're feeling that we have a world in which men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed, and we're not seeing that we have a world where both sexes played a role, where the dominant force was not patriarchy, but the dominant force was survival, and men played one role to help us survive, the role of raising money. Women played another role, the role of raising children, and men were disposable. and we look at the fact that both sexes did wonderful things to get us to be able to have the world that we have now. And so we then begin caring. When we begin caring, we care that somebody commits suicide, and we ask ourselves, what could we have done differently? What could we have done preventively? Why is it that boys in college and universities go to counselors only 25% of the time, even as boys in universities commit suicide 75% of the time? Those are the questions that need to be part of every caring profession, and it's one of the reasons why men need to care enough to get into those professions to make sure those professions aren't toxic toward the whole concept of being a male. Thank you, Dan, for your question. Thank you all. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Farrell. That's a perfect note to wrap things up on. It's been great having you tonight, and I want to remind everyone that we do have a number of things outside. There are people with information, there is a sign-up sheet, there is Cafe's Patreon, and a number of other things.